Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kimball Art Museum's Friday night lecture. I am Jennifer Kassler-Price. I'm curator for Asian, African, and Ancient American art here at the Kimball Art Museum. And it's really my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight in conjunction with our wonderful exhibition, Queen Nefertari's Egypt, which is currently on view and will be on view until March 14th. So I hope that if you live in the vicinity or nearby, that you will come and see it. It's spectacular. But to introduce Dr. Kara Cooney, she is professor of Egyptian art and architecture and chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures, University of California at Los Angeles. She received her BA in German and Humanities at the University of Texas at Austin. So she is a Texas girl. She's from Houston. And her PhD is in Egyptology from Johns Hopkins University. Kara's research in coffin reuse primarily focuses on the 21st dynasty. In Queen Nefertari's Egypt, we have coffins a little bit later than that, from the 25th, 27th dynasties. But this research that she's doing on coffin reuse is ongoing. This research investigates the socioeconomic and political turmoil that have plagued the period, ultimately affecting funerary and burial practices in ancient Egypt. This project has taken her around the world over 10 years to study and document more than 300 coffins in collections around the world, including Cairo, London, Paris, Berlin, and the Vatican City. Her first trade book, The Woman Who Would Be King, Hatshepsut's Rise to Power in Ancient Egypt, is an illuminating biography of its least well-known female king and was published in 2014 by Crown Publishing Group. Her latest book, When Women Ruled the World, 6 Queens of Egypt, was published in 2018 by National Geographic Press. And her next book, The Good Kings, Absolute Power in Ancient Egypt and the Modern World, appears with National Geographic Books in 2021. So in connection with the Kimball's current special exhibition, Queen Nefertari's Egypt, Dr. Cooney's lecture this evening, titled Women and Power in Ancient Egypt, addresses the questions of ancient social inequities and how women negotiated their limited leadership roles. How was their power expressed when often cloaked by a man's dominance? Were they able to rule behind the throne? And how much of this ancient reality still touches us today? So would you please join me virtually in welcoming Dr. Kara Cooney? Thank you. Oh, and we'll take Q&A at the end of the lecture.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys see me? Okay, I'm going to assume that's a yes. So let's move. Oh, thank you, thank you. Because otherwise, I'm just, you know, I speak into the void as a Zoom professor these days all the time. I can keep going, but thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, so I have a number of slides and a whole lot of information to get through. So let's see how we do. Go ahead and keep your questions coming in, and I'll hit those at the end. And I suspect this will be a chance to really think about the time period that we're going through right now, and why everyone essentially is freaking out. It's an interesting time for me on social media. I have a big presence on Facebook, but I'm also on Twitter and other places. And to see the responses when I post a simple news article, although nothing is simple anymore, have been extraordinary. And to see people breaking into certain camps, and to see people engaging in fervent disagreement about things that used to bring people together. This is a very interesting time to be alive. And as a historian with a perspective of a place that lasted for thousands and thousands of years, it is an interesting thing that I am able to bring Egypt, which went through 3,000 years of ups and downs, extraordinary continuity, So that when around me, I see Americans freaking out about rise of authoritarianism, a lack of democratic voting rights, all kinds of things that are happening around us. And they're like, how could it be? Why is this? This is unprecedented. I'm able to look back 250 years as a historian and see that 250 years is like that in my part of the world. So in Egypt, something that happened 250 years before is quite present in the time period 250 years after. So I would remind all of you to think of things in Egyptian terms, that things last. And the United States, the way that it was founded, it will continue like that for some time. And it takes a while for things like that to be revealed, in my opinion, amongst human beings. So we'll start with that caveat. And now let's jump into some of my work. And I think that you heard in the introduction that I am a coffin specialist, which is weird and bizarre and embarrassing to my mother down in Houston, Texas. My father, he thinks it's awesome that I study these coffins. But this is me in Florence, because these Egyptian coffins with colonialism make it all over the world. And I'm studying this coffin in a storage facility and trying to understand whether this particular coffin from a time period of crisis was reused. So it's excellent. Here I am, an expert in crisis, speaking to you at a time of crisis about gender studies and power. So it's perfect. So we'll let the coffins speak to us, but understand that the coffins is one side of my schizophrenic academic self. And then the other side of my academic self are these trade books. And I think these were mentioned in the introduction. The Woman Who Would Be King is my biography on the female king Hatshepsut, more about her soon. And then When Women Ruled the World is about 6 queens of ancient Egypt, 5 of whom became nothing less than king. And we will discuss them tonight as well. And the book that I'm writing right now has more to do with this reality. And it is indeed called The Good Kings. And I wrote it through the last year of pandemic and the last year of the Trump regime. And it's been quite a journey to see how power, well, let me put it this way. I start the book, The Good Kings, with, so you think you don't have a king. You think you're not ruled by a monarchy. You think the United States broke away from this kind of thinking and would never. And it's been interesting for me to see how deeply human beings hold on to authoritarian politics, how they cloak it within democratic systems. And so this book was very much born within the pandemic and born within what many could argue is the fall of democracy happening all around us. And it's been an insight into how our complex civilizations function, how patriarchal they are, what that patriarchy means, and what it means when half of the population, the male half of the population, is quickly losing absolute control over the rest of the population. And in my opinion, that is the freak out that everyone has seen around us. This is quite a political statement, but I think I see, as a historian, the glimmers of the beginnings of the fall of patriarchy itself, which sounds like a big throwdown. And yet patriarchy is only about 10,000 years old around the world at the earliest. And where I'm sitting here in Los Angeles, it's a couple hundred years old at best. Patriarchy is not a normal human method of organization. And it may be more short-lived than some would like, but this is our reality, right? This is our patriarchic reality. So channel that. And now we're going to bring this into the ancient world, into Egypt in particular, with all of these different women. So first, let me set the scene, because Egypt is an extraordinarily different place, very different from where we live now, and very different from other parts of the ancient world. And let me explain it this way. So many of you who are obsessed with antiquity, and I assume many of you are there in the audience, otherwise why would you be here on this Zoom hanging out with me? So for those of you that are obsessed with antiquity, think of what you know about ancient Syria, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Greece, ancient Rome. Think about their geographies in your mind, just basically. And think of how most of those places are difficult to unite geographically and don't have many geographic boundaries. Egypt in that respect is extraordinarily different because it's surrounded by desert on 3 sides. And to the south, there are these giant granite boulders that are blocking the Nile Passage so that you can't take a giant navy from the south and invade from that direction. And to the north, you have the Mediterranean Sea. So Egypt is protected on all 4 sides in this cozy little spot that until ancient people started to figure out how to move quickly in the Iron Age, Egypt didn't have to worry about outside invasion. So it can protect its kingship. And even internally, Egypt has this Nile River carving a channel through its sandstone and limestone bedrock, such that people are wealthy. The Egyptians are fat and happy and drunk on, oh, there, my son is Zoom bombing. Thanks, sweetheart. Love you. Say hi to everyone. Okay, now go watch TV and be a good child. Okay, love you. Sorry about that. Oh dear. Baby, really, there are like 300 people talking here. But yes. Okay, go, 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 go. I love you. I love you. Go do it. Yes. Oh my goodness. Imagine homeschooling. So there, a little insight into real life. Yeah, I'm glad you think it's adorable. That's great. Okay, so then internally, you have that Nile River that's giving everyone in Egypt cheap carbs, if you like. So there's Herodotus went to Egypt in around 400 BCE, and he's like, oh my God, in Greece, you've got to get the plow out and we have to put the grain in and then maybe it'll rain and you have to work so hard. And here in Egypt, you just throw the seeds and let the children and animals trample it. And in a couple of months, you have these fat, juicy kernels of grain and everyone's drunk and full and happy. What that means is that, oh yes, someone just said that they can only see the slides and not me. So that's something that I'm not in control. I think I'm a co-host, but I see what you're saying. So the person who's host may want to correct that because you guys missed the photo bomb of my son, if that's the case. If it's not, this is something, oh, you can see both? Okay. So for those of you that can't see me, if you're on an iPad or a phone, swipe over and it should give you more screens, and then you should be able to see the 3 co-hosts, and we should all show up and you should be able to see my face. Yeah, it's your individual setting. Isn't Zoom fun? Imagine doing this in the classroom since March. Anyway, okay, so let's explain again, dear class, why Egypt is different. 1, you've got protection from all sides, and 2, everyone's got enough grain and calories to not have to compete with each other. And the upshot of that is that you have a divine kingship that is so protected that when something happens to the king, and maybe, you just saw my 10-year-old son, right? So let's imagine that the old king has died and that we're putting a 10-year-old onto the throne. And that 10-year-old isn't quite ready to make decisions and be king yet. The Egyptians decided that they would enthrone that 10-year-old nonetheless, put the crown on his head and do all of the rituals. And then as decision maker, they would ask his mother, that would be me, to come in and make decisions on his behalf. They were very clear that they wouldn't allow the brother of the dead king to come in as decision maker or any other man, because they knew that that would invite discord. And the Egyptians, with their happy on the inside and safe from the outside reality, they are very into maintaining the status quo, particularly in the Bronze Age. And so any sort of discord, anything that would rock the boat, bringing competition was not something that they would like. And so you have a woman calling the shots. Now, think of this on, let me go back to one other point and then I'll come back to the woman. Sorry, my son distracted me. But I told you to think of Greece and Rome and Syria and places like that, right? Think of those places without their lack of unification and lack of borders to protect them. When in those places, a king died and they put a 10-year-old onto the throne, what's going to happen to that 10-year-old in Greece, Rome, or Syria? Most likely that 10-year-old will be dead before the week is out, and the guy holding the bloody knife with his army behind him will be like, haha, I am king next. And everyone will say, yeah, you are, you're king, good for you. But in Egypt, they do things very differently. 1, you don't have this number of regicides. You don't have that amount of competition. People are more comfortable. They don't need to engage in that kind of discord. So the king will make it onto the throne as a 10-year-old, and he will not be accosted for the most part. And there are dozens and dozens of women in the ancient Egyptian historical record who acted as regent on behalf of their young sons. Generally, what they would do is recede into the shadows and let that boy make his decisions when he got older and not try to claim any power for themselves. But some of those women, 5 to be exact, found a way to be the decision maker and then kept that position. Some of them found their way to that top spot through their sons or nephews. Some did not. And so we'll examine all of this stuff as we go along. So let's move to the next slide. All right. Now, some of you may have noticed that I have used already the term female king. And you may be like, why is Kara saying female king? That annoys me. The English language has this word queen, and it's just as good as anything else. She should use it. And there I would push back, because in the Egyptian language and in their culture, they understand the word queen as nothing more than a helpmate or sexual companion of the king. For them, the word queen denoted no power. And so they use the word king. I'm going to use the word king. So we're now calling these women female king. And it's an interesting thing that a woman has to fit herself into this patriarchal position. The patriarchal position does not fit itself to her. We can discuss. But let's jump into our 6 women. One of them I will not have time for. You can wait for that moment. And when that time comes, when that woman comes, I will yell Game of Thrones. And I will say it's too complicated, we will move on. And you can try to guess from looking at these 6 which one it will be. But we'll start with the first. We'll start with Marinate of Dynasty One. So Marineth is a wonderful case study. She's the one who did not become king, but she is buried like a king. And when archaeologists found her burial site at Abydos down south in Egypt, and they were investigating the tomb and what was inside of it and found the burial marker, which you see to the right, they thought it was a king's tomb. They were certain of it. And it's in the lineup of other king's tombs, king's tomb that was older over here and a king's tomb that's younger over here. And they're like, well, it's got to be another king. And they look at the burial marker and they see that it's missing something very important. And some of you who know your Egyptian history might realize that it's missing the Horus bird at the top. So the word king, as was in the first dynasty, is not there. Marineth teaches us that powerful queenship was as important to kingship as anything else, that these two things coincide. And this is another thing that we see with ancient Egypt that makes it quite different from other parts of the ancient world, in that the less competition there is for power, the more power is held in the hands of a few. The more unequal the system it is, the more authoritarian the system is, the more likely it is for women to get into the system at all. So again, go back to Greece and Rome, just compare it in your head and think of how competitive Greece and Rome and Mesopotamia and Syria still are today, but very much were in the ancient world. And I can tell you that from a gender perspective, what that means is when one man falls, another man takes his place. Whereas in Egypt, when one man falls and they put another man on the throne, or there's a problem, or it's the end of a dynasty, or something's going wrong, the family wants to maintain that authoritarian, unequal structure. And so it allows women into power more often than any other place in the ancient world. So you might think, oh my goodness, Egypt is so enlightened. They let women into power more than any other place. And I'm here to give you the tragic underbelly of this, which is that Egypt was just that much more politically unfair and tightly controlled than any other place in the ancient world. And that's why the women got into power. It's more complicated than that, but that's the quick and dirty answer. So Marineth is the recipient of this deep authoritarianism, such that, oh, and here are the other kings with their Horus birds on the top. Look at the center. Marineth does not have hers. So that Horus, that symbol of kingship par excellence, hers is missing. Okay, so let's start over. So here we have Marineth in a lineup of kings, And we have Jer and Jet and Marineth, and then a king named Den, all in a row from left to right in chronological order. And they had found her tomb, and they're trying to figure out the chronology. And they're like, okay, we can see the tombs in a line. We know it goes in this direction, but this Marineth person does not have a Horus on top. What's going on? And then they find a king list. And this king list is a tiny little label. I swear to God, it's like this big, attached to a commodity found in one of these tombs. And this tiny little label is a king list. And it has King Jer to the left, King Jet, the one with the snake, King Den, and then all the way to the right, you see the vulture, which is the sign for mother, and the next with this weird plant thing, and that's the king's mother. And then the name of Marineth is there. And so when archaeologists found this tiny little label in one of these tombs, it was actually in Den's tomb that they found this label. People all freaked out and went, oh my goodness, this is the king's mother. That's why she has this tomb. But how extraordinary that they buried her in this lineup of other kings. So how did this come to be? Let's go back into the past a little bit, and I'll give you the basic breakdowns of her story and how she was so powerful, and how we're telling a story from burial grounds at all. It's rather extraordinary. So in Dynasty One, this was a time period when the ancient Egyptian kings were able to and manufactured power through sacrifice of courtiers. And in the tomb of Jer, who is possibly Marineth's father, archaeologists have identified 587 sacrificed victims, people who ostensibly went to their death willingly. There's no evidence of trauma on these bodies. I'll show you an example in a moment. 587 people minimum. That's just what archaeology has found. And I guarantee you that there are more out there, or were more out there. These are very disturbed tomb sites. Each person gets a little plaque of his or her own. Their gender is shown. The bones of these dead have been examined, and they've been shown to be quite high status, well fed and well bred, if you like. And this is the reality that Marineth grew up with. Marineth was on track to become a very, very important person during the reign of King Jer. We don't know her circumstances. We don't know how old she was, but she was probably alive and aware enough to be there for this moment when they're burying King Jer, the king, who may have been her own father. And she's standing there and watching people be strangled or poisoned. Some people think it was like a cyanide poison sort of reality. She would have seen all of these people die in front of her. She would have heard the wailing of all of the people around her. She may have been one of them wailing. Maybe her own mother was sacrificed to accompany Jer into his burial place. He was accompanied by dozens and dozens of women who would go with him into the afterlife. This is her reality in the court. This is how she understands power.
Kara, I don't know if you can hear me. This is Jennifer, but you are frozen.
Okay, I think I'm back. Can you guys see me?
We can see you. Your PowerPoint is not up.
Okay, I just got kicked off. Let's try again. Here we go. What a day, my goodness. Here we.
So you're frozen again and your PowerPoint is not coming up.
Okay, I know you can hear me. I can see the PowerPoint. It's loaded in the right place and it says stop share, but I'm going to wait in here. so I don't know what's happening. Low bandwidth, no PowerPoint still. Should I turn off my video? You see the PowerPoint now?
No, we can, oh, now we do. It just came back up.
Okay. So
You're
I turned
not
off myself. Do you want me to turn on my video or leave it off?
I don't know. Catherine Stevens, what should she,
Maybe try it off for now, and then we'll see how the connection does, and then you could turn it back on in a little bit.
I think that's
Okay.
a good idea.
Maybe your internet
Try
connection,
is,
Kara.
leave it off. Okay. Okay.
It may be your internet, so yeah. But we see the PowerPoint now.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh my goodness. All right. Let's see how we do. Okay. So she did not expect, this is Marineth, to have her husband die the king so soon after his ascension. We don't know the timing. We really, this is 5,000-year-old history. So it's very difficult to know exactly what's going on here. But Jet, when he died, left only boys to be king after him. And one of those boys, King Den, is enthroned, and that is Marineth's son. And Marineth is positioned as the decision maker. She's the one that's there saying, we're going to turn right, we're going to turn left, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And I have to imagine that Marineth was the one to determine who out of these 328 dead that we have evidence of, who would be included among them. Do we include this person or that person? Do we include that old man, or do we include the brothers of her son? Did she have to sacrifice any of her own children for her former husband and the dead king? We don't know. But what we suspect, and what I suspect in particular, is that this method of human sacrifice that was being used in the first dynasty was a means of manufacturing power for one man alone. So I entitle my chapter in the book, Marineth, Queen of Blood. And I think it's important that when we talk about female rule, we don't think of it as being pacific. There's a lot of talk about how these days, about how women rule differently. And this is a different subject, but it haunts what I'm talking about today. Do women rule differently from men? And I think the only woman or person that was killed in the Capitol riot was a woman, right? Who was actually shot while she was trying to get into the Capitol. So women can certainly be violent. They can fight alongside men. And the way that I conclude this for somebody like Marineth is that if a woman is demanded to be violent to protect the position that she's in, granted to her by an unequal patriarchy, then she will fit in and she will do that. And this is exactly what Marineth does. And so she chooses, you live, you die, you die, you live. And she's deciding who gets to go and who doesn't. And as the decision maker, she sets her son, King Den, up and makes sure that he is incredibly powerful. King Den actually ends up being Egypt's most powerful king yet in Dynasty One. He's a king who invades the Near East and rules for multiple decades, is very, very strong and powerful. And when, oh, and let me move on to this. Wait, let me go here. When Marineth dies, Marineth herself is given by her son a grand burial space. And her burial space also had sacrificial victims, each person with a room of their own, as you can see here, so to speak, each person with a marker of his or her own to show their status, their job, their gender, their name. And the evidence of these dead show no signs, or very few signs, of trauma. One of my former graduate students, Rose Campbell at UCLA, she wrote her dissertation on this data set, these sacrificial victims. And she notes trauma in less than 1/10 of the cases. And that trauma could come post-mortem as well as perimortem at the time of death. So this is a complicated time to study, some 5,000 years ago. But we can see that women are as important to masculine authoritarian rule as anything else. And we can see that women can be just as violent as a man. It all depends on what their position and place in society is. So we're going to skip this one and move along just to give you an idea of how Marineth herself was buried, with 120 dead souls buried with her. And here is a reconstruction of her burial space. Quite grand. And you can imagine now why the archaeologists who were digging here thought this was the burial of a king, because it certainly looks like it. And then you would then understand that her son, King Den, buried her like a king because it served him to have her set up into this position of power. But how interesting that despite all of this power that she held within her life, like all of the women in our story, except for the great failure, Cleopatra, they are removed from the history books. They are removed from the king lists. And so we have Marineth not in this king list of the Second Dynasty. She set Egypt on the path to continuance of her dynasty. She made sure that her son Den was strong and powerful. And yet, when it comes to the next dynasty, they don't want to remember her. They remember Jer and Den and Jet. They're all there. You can see them listed. But the king's mother, Marineth, is gone. And that is another tragedy of this story of female rule from ancient Egypt, in that women were allowed in. They were allowed to have real power. They were even allowed, as we will see, to be those ruling at the top of the spectrum of power itself. And yet, in terms of social memory, cultural memory, who we tell stories about, they were erased. And these are women that we do not talk about. And most of you are probably hearing about Marineth for the first time today. And I think it will probably be the same with our next female ruler, Neferu Sobek of Dynasty 12, who is the first one to become king in her own right and to call herself king. So if this statue belonged to her, and it is debatable, but if it did, she was a formidable, fierce woman, a woman to be obeyed, and a woman who made sure that Dynasty 12 continued in some capacity. And let's look at how this happened. I would argue we actually know even less about Neferu Sobek than we do about Marineth. We don't know her method of burial. We don't know exactly how she came to the throne. There's much more supposition about how this actually worked. So let me give you the bare details of the story that we do know. Her grandfather was Senwosret III, a fierce and dour king who was able to break his elites and get them to come crawling to his capital city, and able to make the authoritarian regime of Egypt stronger than ever before. Senwosret III handed the power off to Neferu Sobek's father, Amenemhet III, who continued this expansion of Egypt and great power. And after that, Amenemhet III, having ruled for about 4 decades, hands the power off to Amenemhet IV, who may have been Marineth's husband, brother. It's not quite clear. The man ruled for a very short period of time, too short. And all of a sudden, he's gone. And that's when we have evidence for Marineth. And the reason for Marineth taking the throne at all is probably because she was not able to have a child. There seems to be no evidence of any issue from this pair. And that could very well be because of incest in ancient Egypt, a reality that we have documented for Cleopatra's Ptolemaic dynasty, for Tutankhamun's 18th dynasty, to be sure. And it seems, and in part, and there are other places to document this, for Neferu Sobek's 12th dynasty. It would be a brilliant mechanism for keeping power within the family, but it's also a very problematic long-term way of maintaining power, because you can't keep your genetic line moving along as you would like. So it's quite possible that the 12th dynasty, which actually began in one of Egypt's few regicides, the king at the beginning of the 12th dynasty was murdered, that this dynasty tries to circle the wagon, so to speak, and keep everything in the family, quite literally. And they may actually have created the end of their own line, such that Neferu Sobek has to come in and rule Egypt on her own. This incest is not something you only see in parts of the world that are not European. Europeans engage in incest too. In fact, all of World War I is started by a bunch of cousins who are too closely related to one another, many of them suffering from incurable genetic diseases. We know of Cleopatra's family, of course, on the left, and the Habsburg family on the right is quite famous. And this image of Charles of the Habsburgs is, from what I have read, quite flattering, quite laudatory compared to what he may actually have looked like. So here is our first female king, Neferu Sobek. The only statue we have that gives her name is headless. So we don't know if that dour image of that woman that I showed you at the beginning is actually her or not. But this is the image that we have. And I think that you can see that the Nemi's headdress, that image that you see from King Tut's mask, that striped headdress, she layers that onto her person, but she maintains her dress. So she continues to be dressed as a woman. She's not going to hide the fact that she's a woman, but she's going to layer elements of the kingship onto her person. She ties the kilt, the king's kilt, around her dress and puts that Nemi's headdress on. She wears the necklace of kingship that's so typical from the 12th dynasty. She justifies her power through her father and not her husband. And I think this is something that we in American politics can understand as well. And if you think back to the 90s when Clinton appointed Hillary to be his healthcare or czar and to write a new plan for healthcare, and people all freaked out. It's an interesting thing that we humans within patriarchies are much more challenged by peer-to-peer husband and wife relationships. And when a wife comes into power simply because of her husband, we have a problem with it. However, when it happens along a lineage, and when a man gives power to his mother or gives power to his daughter, we seem to have not as much problem with it. And for that example, I think you can see pretty clearly that Trump's base is quite happy with Ivanka Trump in power, even though it's not elected power, it's a purely appointed power, but there seems to be much more trust when power goes from the father to the daughter or up father to the mother or mother to the son than it is to a sister or to a wife. These are things that we automatically distrust. Nefer Sobek must have known that. She would have absolutely been aware that to depict herself as the dead king's wife was super problematic, but to be the dead king's daughter, anointed by him to carry on the line into the last breath, that is the mantle that she took up, so that she made sure she depicted her name next to her father's name. And this was her means of maintaining power. Now, she ruled for just a very short time. And after her reign, they moved from Dynasty 12 to Dynasty 13. So she has no progeny that we can speak of. She doesn't take on a new husband. And we have no evidence that she could actually keep the 12th dynasty going on any longer than the remains of her short lifetime. How she left the throne, we don't know. But the fact that's extraordinary is that she was allowed to rule at all, that she was allowed to close out this 12th dynasty. Now, the next female king in our lineup is Shepset of Dynasty 18, about whom I have written an entire book and about whom we could give a long lecture. Her story is incredible, but I'll keep it to the basics. So Hatshepsut was the daughter of a king. She was the sister of a king. She was the wife of a king, but she never became the mother of a king. And that is the strange twist of fate that really paved her path to the kingship itself. Because when her husband, Thutmose II, and we'll skip forward to, this is her as a priestess. And here we'll move to her as God. frozen. Can you hear me now? Anything now? Okay.
This is Jennifer. I can hear
Yes.
you and I can see your PowerPoint.
Okay. All right. I'll keep going. What a mess.
So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, hopefully most people can hear
Oh
you
my
and see the
goodness.
PowerPoint. So we'll just
Okay.
we'll keep powering forward.
Oh my goodness. So let's see. Last I heard was High Priestess. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so, and I'm not turning on my audio now, or my picture, I'm afraid. But as High Priestess, she's also the king's great royal wife. She's his chief queen. And when he dies after only 3 years of reign, she's the one that they pick to be the regent on behalf of a new king who is not her own son. So this is very different from what happened with Marineth. Marineth was the next king's mother. She was there to make sure that he went onto the throne unaccosted, that he was protected, that decision making for him was good. All of this is I'm going to move my, thank you. But with Hatshepsut, we actually have a situation in which the god's wife of Amun and the chief queen is ruling on behalf of a boy who is not her son. And so maybe for that reason, we should not be surprised that it's this woman who takes the throne. It's Hatshepsut who claims the kingship alongside her nephew Thutmose III. And you actually have two kings ruling side by side, Hatshepsut and Thutmose III ruling next to one another. Okay, so here she is being crowned by Amun-Re and by the goddess Mut in front of her, handing her the insignia of life and power and dominion. And the question of why she was crowned at all is highly problematic and something that we don't know. And it gives us more insight into Egypt and its authoritarianism. And this is another interesting point that I think we can make connections to the modern world again with. For example, if I wanted to ask what was going on in North Korea today and how's Kim Jong-un and what's his relationship with his sister or other people at his governmental center, I would get very little information, because the more authoritarian the place is, the less information comes out for us to hear about. This is the same in ancient Egypt. Whereas in the modern world or in ancient Greece or Rome, you have all kinds of rumor mongering. You have all kinds of information coming out. We have leaks from the White House about what President Trump is feeling or what plans are for this or that. We know what Nancy Pelosi told an aide. You know, all of this stuff leaks out. In authoritarian systems, we don't get this information. So the Realpolitik, to use the German word, is not revealed for us to see. The Egyptians only give us images like this. They give us the perfection. They give us the king being crowned by the god Amun-Re himself and the goddess Mut, and everything is absolutely perfect. And she tells us why she becomes king. She says it's because her father Amun-Re needed and wanted her to become king. But she doesn't actually give us any other real information. Was Thutmose III sick? Did he fall off his chariot? Did he have a broken leg and people thought he was going to die? Was his side of the family butting in and trying to take control? None of this is actually clear. But crowned she was, and this woman never ruled alone. She ruled for about 22 years, depicting herself like a man, and we'll get into that, and ruled alongside Thutmose III, her nephew, and always put herself in the first position. So you see Hatshepsut in the first position there on the right, and Thutmose III behind her to the left. She was a jobs creator par excellence. She was in control of all of the money of Egypt. She was in control of the temple. The priests were in her pocket. She sent expeditions off to faraway lands and made sure she recorded all of the details of those expeditions. She was in control of awesome building projects, including her own temple of millions of years. And yet throughout all of this, she could not expect the kingship to fit to her. She had to fit herself to it. So here you see her depicted as a female king, much like Neferu Sobek before her in Dynasty 12. This wasn't satisfactory. So she had to become androgynous. And any woman who walks into the halls of power today in the modern world knows this. You put on your pantsuit, you put on your shoulder pads, you put on your blocky heels, you put your hair back, put on your glasses, masculinize. Hatshepsut tried to do the same thing. You can see her masculinizing here, shirtless, maybe with bound breasts. It's not clear exactly what's going on, but the femininity is still apparent. You can see the heart-shaped face, the gracile body. It's all still quite feminine. And in the end, she's like, whatever. She just throws in the towel, and most of the statues that depict her show her with full shoulders, with full pectoral muscles, with even a strong masculine chin. She is shown as a man. And this is what the gods expected. This is what Egypt expected. It seems to be, but in her text, for those who could read, she retains the pronouns she and her. So it is an interesting story for Hatshepsut. She does everything right for her god Amun-Re on the right, and she is buried by her nephew, seen here on the right, Thutmose III, in state in
Kara, we've lost your audio again. Can you hear me? This is Jennifer. Kara?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
We can hear you. Yep, keep going.
Oh my goodness. Somebody check if Mercury's in retrograde. What's
right.
Oh, and it's funny because I just did Zooms all day today, and of course it's going horribly wrong with this, but here we go.
Zoom is tired.
It is, something's wrong, and no one else is on Zoom in my house, so I don't know what's going on.
Okay, keep going.
Thank you. Okay, so 20 years after her death, after she's buried in state with all of the sarcophagi and canopic jars and all of these things, her images are smashed to bits. You can see on the right that all the statues that I have been showing you have been glued back together from tiny little pieces. So that statue of the white limestone, that's been glued back together. And in fact, half of that face isn't even there. If you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to see it and look really closely, you'll see that that piece is reconstructed from little fragments. They took sledgehammers to these pieces and broke her up bit into bit, and that her names were erased. She is removed from the Egyptian history books. And we can go into the details of why this is, but we need Cleopatra to help us to solve this story. Now, in the interest of time, I think I'm going to have to say Game of Thrones for two of these women and move on to Cleopatra and give you guys a chance to ask me questions. I think that would be a good way of doing this, since it's already 4:50 and Cleopatra is super important, and you can have me back to talk about Nefertiti. But let's look at some beautiful images of this woman who most people think is just a pretty face, but who actually became king in her own right as co-king alongside her husband Akhenaten, and then sole king after Akhenaten's death. So I'll just show you a couple of details. For those of you that want to know more about Nefertiti, please understand that her story is being written as we speak by archaeologists who are digging things up and finding amazing things about Akhenaten's reign, who are working at Tel el Amarna. And there's even one Egyptologist, Nicholas Reeves, who suggests that Nefertiti's tomb is waiting undiscovered behind the tomb of Tutankhamun. And it's her tomb as a king in the Valley of the Kings. So there is much more to say about Nefertiti, and so much about her story that we have yet to reveal. But she was the great royal wife of Akhenaten, and ended up going with him on his strange journey into solar worship, as you see here, to his new capital of Akhenaten, when he changed his name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten. And she's his great royal wife. She gets a new name change at the same time as Neferu Aten Nefertiti. Try saying that 3 times fast. And if my audio goes down, you won't even be able to hear it. But there's her new name for those of you that can read it. Her image matches him in its strangeness, it's in its elongated forms. And their scenes of family togetherness are quite famous for many people. The daughters hanging out with their family, the kissing, the sun falling down on their faces and giving them life. There's all kinds of details about this time period that suggest that Akhenaten was engaging in real social upheaval, trying to lock down his authoritarian regime by giving more power to the military. It's an interesting time. The archaeology coming out of his city is showing overwork, abuse, and even gulag type conditions for many of the people who built the city. This is very provocative research, and more work needs to be done. But the people who work on these skeletons will tell me flat out that this man was not in charge of good things. But it was during his reign that Nefertiti may very well have become co-king alongside him as, and here's the name, Ankh-Khepru Re Neferu Aten. And she keeps a tiny piece of herself and brings it with her into her co-kingship. So she doesn't use a son. She doesn't use a nephew to get to power. She may not even have wanted power. We actually have no idea. But her husband, the king, Akhenaten, makes her his co-king. What she thought about it, what she felt, was she worried? Was she afraid? Did she believe in his strange new regime? We have no idea what her inner thoughts were, but this was her life. And the information coming out about her is so extraordinary. So this mask of Tutankhamun that all of you can see in your mind's eye, but it's right here in front of you, may very well have belonged to an Ankh-Khepru Re before it belonged to Tutankhamun. And the traces for Ankh-Khepru Re are there underneath Tutankhamun's name. And I've seen it with my own eyes, those traces, they fit and it would work. That this mask was likely then made for Nefertiti as co-king and not for Tutankhamun at all. And if that doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what will. Is this Nefertiti or not? Egyptology is to be decided over it. If you want to start a bar fight, you can go in and mention the next discussion point, which was, did Nefertiti become sole king after the death of her husband Akhenaten? Is she Ankh-Khepru Re Smenkhare? This is very debated, and I would say Egyptologists are 50-50 on this one. And the reason that so many think that she was this mysterious King Smenkhare is because the name Ankh-Khepru Re is retained. And so this is the kind of thing that we're trying to do with some of these female kingships, because they had to become something different and match themselves to the kingship. Because they were so often erased after their kingship, we are left as the historians trying to puzzle through all of this history and figure it out as best we can. And these women deserve nothing less from us. So we do have to engage in a little bit of hypothesizing, a little bit of guesswork, trying to figure out who might be who. But this is the game of ancient history. And it's certainly the game of studying authoritarian regimes who don't give us all of the power plays that occur in the back rooms. Now, you all know who my Game of Thrones woman is, and that would be Tawasret of Dynasty 19, whose story in the midst of the civil wars at the end of Dynasty 19 is just too extraordinarily complicated for me to tell here. So just know that there's a king with a club foot involved whom she may actually have had murdered. There's all kinds of complications going on in this dynasty, and she was a brave and formidable woman. But like Neferu Sobek, she rules for only a very short period of time. And after that, after her short reign, and she was ousted from the throne by the next dynasty, a new dynasty takes over, and she has no progeny of her own to continue the kingship. And now finally, we move to Cleopatra, who in many ways is not even Egyptian at all, but Macedonian Greek. But when it comes to Cleopatra VII, it gets really interesting because it doesn't seem that Cleopatra V was her mother. At least she doesn't name her as such. And Cleopatra VII is also the only Macedonian Greek ruler of Egypt to speak Egyptian. And many Egyptologists and classicists would argue that Cleopatra's mother was full or half Egyptian. And so Cleopatra herself, she ends out this story with an Egyptianness, even though her colonial invading dynasty is not Egyptian in its origins. Now, her story is similar to Neferu Sobek's in how she takes the throne, and yet she's very different in how she uses her sexuality and her power almost like a man. So like Hatshepsut, she knows that she can never rule alone, and she does not rule alone. She rules for also about 22 years altogether. She starts out alongside her father, Ptolemy XII, as a kind of co-ruler. Then she is placed next to her brother, Ptolemy XIII, as wife. This didn't end well. Ptolemy XIII ends up sieging Alexandria while she and Julius Caesar are stuck inside. And so they obviously did not get on very well and didn't consummate that marriage, at least as far as we can tell. She moves on to brother number 2, or is forced to move on to brother number 2, Ptolemy XIV. She has this one assassinated. But Cleopatra knew, just like Hatshepsut knew, just like many women today know, that within a patriarchy, your means to finding power is through the men around you. And so Cleopatra launched about for the strongest man that she could find. This is not Bronze Age Egypt. She can't look to a relative. She's out perched on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. She's part of a larger geopolitical scrum, so to speak. And she looks to the most famous, or he finds her, warlord that she can find. And so Julius Caesar and she start a hot affair. She conceives a child, the future Ptolemy XV, and to be lovingly named Caesarion with Julius Caesar. And she is in Rome when he is killed on the steps of the Senate. So that one didn't work out too well, but she knows she needs somebody else. So we know already what the story is and who she moves on to. And she moves on to Mark Antony. He writes her letters, she's coquettish, doesn't write back, but in the end, these two form a mighty union of money and labor and power and ingenuity. And if it weren't for Mark Antony's interest in becoming the most powerful Alexander the Great warlord the world had ever seen, they probably would have held on a lot longer. But Mark Antony decided to invade Parthia. And I don't know how many historians are out there, but that's having a land war in Asia. And nobody has a land war in Asia and does really well. Well, he's defeated horrifically and comes back to Egypt with his tail between his legs. And even a victory in Armenia can't turn this ship around. So the writing is on the wall, really. We're skipping ahead. The writing is on the wall when they meet at the Battle of Actium. Mark Antony, Cleopatra, they meet Octavian, and they lose in this ginormous battle of epic proportions. And Cleopatra, we are told, races home, and Mark Antony follows suit not long after. And of course, we have the supposed suicides. Mark Antony commits suicide, we are told, and Cleopatra as well. Now, I'm going to end this session on Cleopatra and then get into some larger issues and then go to questions. But you see already up here where I say suicide or murder. In my chapter on Cleopatra, I try to write her story from an Egyptian perspective. And I take all of these Roman sources that tell us that she was a drama queen, that she was power hungry, that she was willing to murder slaves to see which poison worked best on her, that she was this cruel mistress. I take all of those Roman sources and I throw them out the window. And I try to write Cleopatra's story like I wrote Marineth's story of 5,000 years ago, like I wrote Neferu Sobek's story, like I wrote Hatshepsut's story, with Egyptian sources, trying to understand what's going on. I would caution all of you to think, who's telling us that Cleopatra committed suicide? It's the Romans. What evidence for it do we have that she committed suicide? Well, the Romans tell us that she did. And it works very well on our minds. Cleopatra is left to us as this woman who was too weak to be paraded in one of the great displays of victory in Rome, who was willing to abandon her children and her entire country because she was too proud to be enslaved to the Romans. We are left with the story of a woman who was so power hungry and sex hungry that she ensnared two good Roman men, turned them against themselves with her sorcery, and made them do things they wouldn't have done otherwise. That is what the Roman sources tell us. When really, if you look at Cleopatra through a different lens, she is very much stuck between a rock and a hard place. They're trying to save Egypt when Egypt is about to be snapped into the jaws of the Roman Empire, when perhaps the best way for her to save Egypt is to league up with one of those Roman warlords. And Cleopatra is that one who acts the most like a man, because she marries neither Julius Caesar nor Mark Antony, and yet she has multiple children with both of them. She has 4 total children with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and never formalizes any of these relationships, but she uses them for what she can get from them. And this is part of the reason that we are able to take Cleopatra and demonize her, really turn her into something that is immoral, is wrong, is ambitious to a fault, is something that is deserving of suicide, and murder is almost too good for her. But I think for Octavian to have her killed and then claim that she committed suicide, it actually makes all the sense in the world from my perspective. And now to wrap all of this up, I think that my final piece on female power, and we can discuss this in the Q&A, is that I find it extraordinarily interesting that female success is ignored and its failure is aggrandized and written about again, and Shakespeare writes a play about it, and then Elizabeth Taylor stars in a movie about it, and we're still talking about it because now Gal Gadot has just signed on to a deal to play Cleopatra, and the Twitter explodes and everyone freaks out. We love to write and rewrite stories about women's failure. We do not like to write stories about how well they did things, about their success. And then this one last point, which is an interesting one. Success it's a fungible thing. It's something that can be claimed by somebody else. So think of the last really great idea you brought into the boardroom, or the great idea you gave to your boss that your boss then brought into the boardroom and claimed as their own. Success is something that everyone wants to take credit for, that everyone wants to claim. So being successful, it's easy to reassign that to somebody else. Whereas failure, the Battle of Actium, suicide with an asp, all of these things are very unique and unusual stories, and something that can be assigned to one particular person. And we still use them today as cautionary tales about why women should not rule. And I will leave it there and take your questions. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Kara, so much. This is Jennifer, and thanks for powering through the lecture despite some technical difficulties. So we've got some questions in the Q&A.
Let me stop my share and then see if my screen will work, and maybe we can do it this way.
Okay, I see you.
Let's see if it works. Okay, so let's see. Do you want to, Jennifer? Because there's a lot in there already.
Yeah.
Do you want to field them?
I will. I've been kind of writing down some of the shorter ones. Let's see. So when and why did human sacrifice cease as a part of the burial of kings?
This is the most interesting thing, and I could write a whole book on just human sacrifice and kingship, because you can document human sacrifice when kingship is new all over the world. You see it in different parts of Africa, north to south. You see it in Europe. You see it in Asia. You see it in the New World. And it's when the kingship is establishing itself for the first time and showing that power to its people, demonstrating it visually and bodily, that human sacrifice takes place. And it seems to be almost a universal human mechanism for creating kingship. And when that kingship is established, human sacrifice then goes away, and another dynasty takes over that says, we would never make you guys commit sacrifice for us. And yet that human sacrifice is what it is there in the cultural memory. It's what people remember. For those of you who have been lucky enough to go to Egypt and stand in front of the Great Pyramid, you may hear people around you may even think, oh, people were sacrificed for that building. The women were left inside, or the man who built the Great Pyramid he had to pave his way, he had to lock himself inside, the last person to close the pyramid. These are not true, but they're only a couple hundred years off, really, because the tombs of Abydos and the great Dynasty One tombs at Saqqara, the human sacrifice is off the hook, and it's demonstrable. The fact that they don't occur in Dynasty 4 is because they don't have to. And you have a different kind of sacrifice occurring in Dynasty 4. So super interesting question. And I encourage you to do some Wikipedia search on that score. And research into human power it's never boring, I'll tell you that. And it's certainly something that I engage in as much as I possibly can.
Right. Let's see. Oh, why do Egyptian statues tend to have the nose missing?
So that made the news about a year ago. A colleague of mine, Ed Bleiberg of the Brooklyn Museum of Art, had some theories for why the noses were removed. I don't agree with Ed. The noses are not there because, well, in the statues that I showed you, the noses are not there because the sledgehammer is taken to the face first. And it's actually taken to the uraeus on the crown first. So that cobra rising up. The kingship has to be removed from the woman. Then they remove the woman, right? Yeah. So it makes sense that with Hatshepsut, that protruding element from her face would be one of the first things removed. When statues are set up in different places, Greek or Roman or whatever kind of statue it might be, if a statue is standing and it's balanced in a certain way and it falls, then anything that's sticking out is going to fall off, which is why the Venus de Milo has no arms. So anything that is protruding will come off. Ears are pretty close, and they're usually carved in the stone close to the head. So they're going to be there, but that nose, it's protruding. It's in a vulnerable place. So I think it's as simple as that. I mean, having said that, if you go into an Egyptian temple that's been reused as a church or reused as a mosque, but really mostly as a church, you will see that the monks and the priests went through and chiseled away all of the eyes and the nose and the mouth and took all of the life away from these faces and made sure that they couldn't see, they couldn't smell, they couldn't speak. So the noses and reliefs are removed for that reason, arguably. So they can't breathe. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Someone wanted to know where Marineth's tomb is located.
It's a place,
yeah.
The first one, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a place called Abydos or Abydos. If you're in Egypt, you'll hear people say Abydos, Abydos. And it is located just north of ancient Thebes, modern day Luxor. It's one of the northernmost cities on the Cana Bend. So if you imagine the Nile, it goes down and has this kind of bumpy curve in it. At that curve, that northernmost part, that's where Abydos is. What we call Upper Egypt, because the Nile flows from south to north. And I have been there, but when I was there last, we were not able to go out and see where these great kings were buried. And even if I had been able to walk around there, the archaeologists cover them back over. So they're just mounds in the earth. And back in the day, they would have had more grand spaces like the reconstruction of the Marineth tomb that I showed. Mm-hmm. But they're still kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So it makes sense that the Egyptologists are still arguing amongst one another about where the kings of Egypt in Dynasty One were actually buried. Were they buried at Abydos or Saqqara? And that's still up in the air for many of us. And there's sacrificial burials at each one, and they have tombs at each one. So it's a complicated reality.
Mm-hmm. This is a good one. So I believe this is a reference to Akhenaten and Nefertiti, the sun worshiping couple. They're elongated. I mean, the depiction them is elongated. And is this some kind of mannerism in Egyptian art, or was there an actual physical, do we think they physically looked like that? And I'll let you answer, because I know a little bit about that.
Well, what do you think? What's your take on it?
I mean, and maybe I'm wrong, but with all of the inbreeding going on, that may have played a factor into it. But also, just as you mentioned, they were so close. I mean, they are depicted as this truly loving couple, and because she was his, the co-ruler, they're kind of depicted like, brother and sister, or twins, or whatever. But you answer.
Well, Egyptology has been trying to puzzle this out for decades. Ever since these images first started to come up out of the ground, people are like, what the hell is this? This weird elongated head, this neck that's like so long, it's just unnatural and strange. Shoulders that are really thin and spindly and kind of turn in a little bit. And the wrists are like non-existent. Very strange fingers are also elongated. And a whole field of biomedical examination has exploded for Akhenaten, just to try to figure out what he's got. People have said he's got Marfan syndrome, he's got Froelich syndrome, he was a hermaphrodite, all kinds of theories. And I would throw out all of them and follow the Egyptologist Dorothea Arnold, who said that when Akhenaten cleared out the religious system and created this first monotheism, that's a debatable point right there that we could discuss, whether it's monotheistic or not. And really, Akhenaten demands his own lecture. But he's getting rid of divinities, whether it's monotheistic or not. He is clearing out divinities with crocodile heads and hawk images, and that are male and that are female. He's getting rid of all of them, and he's replacing them with the sun disk and with his own family. And so he's moving himself and his body into this vacuum. And because the power vacuum, or the religious vacuum that needs to be filled, is animal, human, male, and female, I think that's why he looks animal and human, male and female. Now, that's not my idea. That's Dorothea Arnold's idea. I would, however, take it one step further and say that the other thing that Akhenaten is depicting is light, because that's his religion, that's his God. And so his favorite place to depict himself was in this window of appearances. So he would be standing at a window and he would toss things out to his courtiers and give them little trinkets and bribe them and do whatever. Talk to his people in that way. He would show himself in the temple or in the palace in that way. Now, I can imagine this guy would choose, I'm assigning some assumptions from the modern day, but he doesn't seem like a wallflower. He seems more like a narcissistic kind of ruler to me, to do all of the things that he did. And I imagine that he would choose the most opportune time of day to show himself in this window of appearances, so that there would be light shining, the sunlight coming behind, blinding the people's eyes as they looked up at their king. And that light deformed his body. And so many of you may remember the movie. I try to use this with my students and they don't know it because they're all so young, but the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when the aliens first come out of the spaceship and the light's behind them and it elongates the bodies and make them look really weird. But then when they come out, they're just like weird, smaller people and they're not that strange at all, but the light had distorted their image. I think, and the way Akhenaten writes about himself and writes about his body as a being of light, I think he's trying to show himself as a distorted, uber-human image of light. And it's an art historical visual representation of a different kind of power. And I think Nefertiti, as his female companion, gets to have that as well. She's not his sister. She's not related to him. So there's no evidence for any other reason why she would need to look exactly the way that he does. And then his daughters look that way as well. And then one final point I'll make on this very long answer to this question is that his mummy has been probably identified, probably. And if that mummy is his, looks normal. There's no, yes, its genetics do show that it is the product of some level of incest in the family, but it's not egregious, and there's nothing on the body itself that shows anything that would demand that kind of depiction. And throughout his reign, sometimes he looks more overblown and sometimes he looks more normal. But he's trying to show something, which is very interesting. It's such an interesting time period, really is.
Yeah. Let's see. Is there a significance to the number of sacrifices buried with Marineth and her male cohort? As you said, not all sacrifices have probably been found, but how was the quantity of sacrifice determined?
What a discerning question, because this questioner noticed that Jer had some 400 sacrificial victims, that Jet had some 300 sacrificial victims. Den's going to have another 400 something. He does really well. And Marineth has a sad 110 or 112, something like that. And you think, oh, it's because she's a woman and not a man. That's the knee-jerk reaction. And that's what I was taught. That's what I thought. And then I started to think about it a little bit. And my former student, now Dr. Rose Campbell, was doing this research and proving that the people who were buried had good, strong teeth, were well nourished, were tall and strong. There's even a contingent of young men buried in some of these sacrifices. So they are taking the best that they have and sacrificing them. So that means, in my mind, that when Jet, is it Jet? Yes, when Jet dies and Den takes the throne very young, more men and boys are killed for that burial, which makes sense, right? And because they're trying to keep the throne safe, they're trying to move any competition away, literally by killing it, right? When Marineth dies, there's no transfer of power. It's not a vulnerable time. This isn't a time of the king is dead, long live the king. Oh my God, what's going to happen? You know, who's going to try to come in? What's going to we're all worried about keeping our jobs. There's none of that. Den is super powerful. He's the most powerful king Egypt's ever seen. He's showing his power by burying his mother like a king. He's like, what are you going to do? Stop me? No. I'm even going to give her human sacrifices. Does he need to? No. It's kind of like an egregious power show on his part for him. But he doesn't need to go overboard, because it's not about keeping a courtier population in check for the transfer of power to the next king. That's why she doesn't have as many. The fact that she has any at all is a testament to human sacrifice itself and how it works for the reigning king. Human sacrifice is not there for the dead king. Whatever we tell ourselves, whatever the ancient people told themselves, human sacrifice is there to cement the power of the guy who's on the throne now. And he can say, oh, I'm not doing it to you guys. I would never. But the king before, you know, he needs you to die. And thank you so much. You're going to go to the afterlife. It's going to be great. And people go, yes, I would love that. I want to have the awesome afterlife. People go willingly. And it's the living king who feeds off of that power, if you like.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot more questions, but we just don't have the time. I think we could be here for hours and hours. I will just ask, somebody did want to know if you are planning to lecture again sometime soon, that they could have access.
Yes, sure.
And another
for
museum lecture or
absolutely. And so I'm sorry for all of the technical difficulties, and I'm going to check and see what's going on, because I can't believe it happened for a talk like this. And my deep apologies. So I don't know what's going on, but I will check. But I'm out there. So if you want to see more of me, I have a YouTube channel where, if you haven't seen me talk on my YouTube, you'll get like, I don't know, hours and hours of me speaking about different topics. Many of them that combine the ancient and modern worlds. And I noticed there were some comments about, why is she combining the ancient and modern worlds? And I do so quite knowingly and quite strategically, understanding that we're not that different from these ancient Egyptian people. We fetishize them and make them otherworldly, but we could learn from them and learn from their rises and their falls, because we will rise and fall ourselves. So I treat history very much in that way of, what can we learn from the past, rather than trying to think that we modern Americans are so exceptional that we have it all figured out. I think we could learn a lot from the ancient Egyptians. And that's a lot of what my YouTube lectures are about. So you can go there and listen to that. Also, on my just my website, Kara Cooney, it's a Squarespace page. And if you Google me, you'll find it. I just had all my podcasts put up, every podcast that I've ever done. And there are a good dozen, there are a lot of them up there. And so you were just mentioning, Jennifer, the one I did with Ali Ward on ologies. That was super fun.
Yeah.
And so you could listen to that one. And there's a number of other podcasts that are up there. So if you really want to hear me droning on and without as many technical difficulties, there's much out there for you to
yeah,
consume.
I just found that on Spotify. And I just typed in your name.
Yeah.
So,
oh, really? That's extraordinary. I haven't tried typing my name into Spotify. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So there's a lot out there. And I toy with the idea of Facebook Lives when I feel like it. But as you can see in modern day politics, and sometimes even the comments here, things are very charged and people get very, it's hard to go out there and give an opinion right now. And sometimes Facebook Lives are just too much for me. And I'm like, I need to rest now. So I can do them, but everything is political now. Ancient history is political. The weather is political. And so, sometimes it's hard for me to do a Facebook Live, but I'll try to get back out there as soon as I can.
Great. And then your next book, the one on patriarchy, just tell us again when that's planned to come out.
So that's called The Good Kings. What was my subtitle, Jennifer? You use absolute power in ancient Egypt and in the modern day. That's it. I remember it. Hell, I wrote it, so I should know what I'm saying.
Absolute power in ancient Egypt and the modern world. The Good Kings. Absolute power in ancient Egypt and the modern world.
And it's using 5 Egyptian kings to understand authoritarian and patriarchal power, how it works, how it still works today, how we don't recognize it as such because we call it things like democracy or communism or whatever whatever terms we use. And I actually don't know. I just delivered the manuscript to Nat Geo Books, and I'm thinking it will come out anytime between June and October. I'll keep you posted, and when I have an exact date for that, 2021, it'll be out. I'm endnoting as we speak, so that work is continuing apace. But it'll be who's in there? Senwosret III, Ramses II, some of the big guns are in there. Akhenaten, of course, he gets his own chapter, so it should be fun.
Forward to that. Well, Kara, thank you so very much, and again, thank you for powering through the technical difficulties. And to all of our attendees, thank you all for sticking with us today. And I hope you enjoyed the lecture from the comments that I'm seeing. I think you did. And I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all the questions. As I said, we would be here for hours. But Kara, I'm going to try to get you back here physically.
Okay, I'll work on it.
Would love to welcome you here at the Kimballs. So
I'd love to come.
Thanks again, and thanks to everyone out there. And have a great weekend and happy MLK Day.
Yay! Thank you guys. Thanks so much. Thanks for all these lovely comments. I even had my son Zoom bomb me. It's like everything happened. It's just crazy.
That's life.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna sign out for you guys. Thank you so much. Take